you have a vision, not a vague one, a real one. You can see it clearly, the life you're supposed to be living, the thing you're supposed to be building, the person you're convinced you have the potential to become. And it feels so real sometimes that it almost doesn't feel like a dream. It feels like a memory of something that hasn't happened yet. You talk about it, maybe not to everyone, but to the right people in the right moments. You let it out. And when you do, your eyes light up in a way they don't for much else. People can see it on your face, the certainty, the conviction, the hunger. And then, nothing. Days pass, weeks, months, sometimes years. And the dream stays exactly where it was, vivid, intact, untouched. Not because you forgot it, not because you stopped believing in it, but because somewhere between the vision and the first real step, something stops you. Every single time, and you don't fully understand what it is, which makes it worse. Because you can't fix what you can't name. So you tell yourself the timing isn't right. You tell yourself you're still preparing. You tell yourself that when the right moment arrives, you'll know it and you'll move. The moment never quite arrives. And quietly, underneath everything, you start to wonder if something is wrong with you. If you are somehow fundamentally broken in a way other people aren't. You're not. But what's actually happening is more complicated than you've been told, and more fixable than you think. Let's start with something that's going to sound backwards. The dream itself might be part of the problem. Not the size of it, not the ambition of it, the vividness of it. In 2011, psychologist Gabriela Oettingen published research that fundamentally challenged one of the most deeply held beliefs in self-help culture. The belief that visualizing your success helps you achieve it. Her findings were uncomfortable. She found that people who engaged in vivid, positive fantasy about their future, who really immersed themselves in the imagined version of success, actually performed worse in real life than people who didn't fantasize at all. Not slightly worse. Measurably, consistently worse. And the reason is counterintuitive, but once you hear it, you can't unhear it. When your brain vividly imagines something, it partially experiences it. The same reward circuits that fire when something good actually happens fire in a quieter way, when you imagine it happening. Which means every time you sit with the dream, really sit with it, let it play out, feel the feeling of having made it. Your brain gets a small taste of the reward without any of the work. And a brain that has already tasted the reward has slightly less urgency to go earn it. The fantasy isn't fueling you. In some very specific and very real way, it's been feeding you instead. But that's only part of what's happening. Because there's something else going on, something deeper, something most people refuse to look at directly. The dream is safe. Think about that for a moment. As long as you haven't tried, really tried, you haven't failed. The potential is still fully intact. The version of you who could have made it still exists, somewhere in the future, completely uncontradicted by reality. And that potential, that untested, unmarked, perfectly preserved potential, feels precious in a way that's very hard to explain. Because the moment you actually start, you introduce something terrifying. Evidence. You find out what you're actually capable of, not the imagined version, the real one. And what if the real version doesn't match the one you've been carrying? What if you try fully, genuinely, with everything you have, and it turns out the dream was too big, or you were too late, or you just weren't quite enough? That possibility, as long as you haven't tried, doesn't exist. It cannot exist. There is no evidence against you, and so you stay in the space before the attempt, where everything is still possible, where the best version of yourself is still fully intact and waiting. Not because you're lazy, because you are protecting something that feels irreplaceable. Psychologists have a name for this. It's called self-handicapping, and it's one of the most sophisticated defense mechanisms the human mind has ever developed. Self-handicapping is when you unconsciously create conditions that make failure easier to explain. You don't start the project, so if it fails, it's because you didn't really try. You don't fully commit, so if it doesn't work out, you still have the version of yourself who could have done it if only you'd really gone for it. You keep it as a plan so it can never become a disappointment. The logic underneath all of this is almost elegant. If I try and fail, I lose the dream. If I never try, I keep it forever. And some part of your brain, the part that is more interested in protecting your self-concept than in actually building your life, has decided that keeping it is worth more than chasing it. This is not weakness. This is intelligence pointed in exactly the wrong direction. Now let's talk about identity. Because this is the layer most people never reach. And it might be the most important one. There's a question that lives underneath all of this that almost nobody asks out loud. Who am I? If I'm not the person with the dream, think about how long you've carried this vision. For some of you, it's been years. For some of you, it's been most of your adult life. And in that time, the dream became part of how you understand yourself, part of your identity, the thing that separates you from people who have just settled. The thing that makes you someone with a direction, with a purpose, with something more on the horizon. The dream makes you interesting to yourself. And pursuing it, really pursuing it, means risking becoming ordinary. Because what happens if you try, and it's harder than you imagined, and progress is slower, and the reality is messier and more boring and more uncertain than the vision ever was? You're no longer the person with the beautiful dream. You're just someone struggling with a difficult thing, like everyone else. And that shift from visionary to beginner is psychologically enormous. Most people underestimate how much of their sense of self is tied up in the possibility of who they could become, and how threatening it feels to trade that possibility for the uncertain, uncomfortable, unglamorous reality of actually trying to become it. There's also something happening neurologically that nobody talks about. The brain genuinely cannot tell the difference, in every meaningful way, between planning to do something and doing it. When you think in detail about starting the business, your brain activates many of the same regions it would activate if you were actually starting it. When you research obsessively, build the perfect plan, buy the course, read the books, organize the files, your brain registers all of that as progress. It feels like movement. It produces a mild version of the satisfaction that actual movement would produce. Researchers call this phenomenon declared goals. When you tell someone about your goal, or even just articulate it clearly to yourself, your brain partially processes it as already achieved. The intention gets filed alongside the accomplishment, and then the urgency drops. Not completely, but enough. Enough that tomorrow feels fine, next week feels fine, after this one thing feels fine, and you are not procrastinating in the way people imagine procrastination. Like someone lounging around, indifferent. You are busy, genuinely busy. Planning, preparing, refining, waiting for the right conditions, all of which feels like responsible groundwork, and none of which is the thing. Let's be honest about something. Some of you have been preparing for years. The preparation has become the life. And there's a version of perpetual preparation that is indistinguishable from the outside, from a person who is genuinely working towards something. But you know the difference? You know whether the preparation is building toward a moment of action or whether it is quietly replacing one. And if you're honest, really honest, you probably know which one it is. That knowing is important. Don't look away from it. Here's something else worth understanding. The people who actually execute, who take the dream and do something real with it, they are not more confident than you. That is one of the most damaging myths that exists around action and achievement. The idea that the people who started did so because they believed in themselves, because they knew it was going to work, because they had some quality of certainty or courage that made the leap feel manageable. Most of them didn't. Most of them were terrified. Most of them felt completely unready. Most of them started with a version of the thing that was embarrassingly smaller than the vision. The difference, and it is a real difference, is not confidence. It's tolerance for the discomfort of beginning. That's it. That is the whole thing. The people who move, they feel the same fear, the same uncertainty, the same gap between where they are and where they want to be, and they start anyway. Not because it stops being uncomfortable, but because they stopped waiting for the discomfort to lift before they moved. They figured out that the feeling of readiness is not something that arrives before you start. It's something that builds after There's a particular kind of pain that comes with this pattern. And I want to name it because most people feel it but can't quite locate it. It's the pain of self-betrayal. Every time you tell yourself you'll start Monday, and Monday comes and goes, something very small happens. You break a promise to yourself, and unlike promises to other people which carry social consequences, which have witnesses, which create accountability, promises to yourself can be broken quietly, with no one watching, with very little immediate consequence. So they get broken again, and again, and over time this builds something invisible but very real. A kind of distrust of yourself. A quiet background belief that when you say you're going to do something, you probably won't. And that belief, once it settles in, becomes one of the most powerful barriers to action that exists. Because why begin if some part of you has already decided you won't follow through? The dreams stay vivid. The self-trust erodes quietly beneath them. And the gap between the two grows wider every year. So what actually changes this? Not motivation. Motivation is a feeling, and feelings are unreliable. Waiting to feel motivated before you act is like waiting to feel warm before you light the fire. Not inspiration either. Inspiration visits people who are already working. What actually changes this is a decision. A specific, boring, unsexy, undramatic decision to do something small today. Not a version of the thing that matches the scale of the vision. Not something impressive. Not something post-worthy or worth announcing. Something real. Something actual. The smallest possible version of a first step, because here is what the research on habit formation and behavior change consistently shows. Action precedes motivation, not the other way around. You don't act because you feel ready. You start to feel ready because you acted. The doing changes the feeling. Not immediately, not dramatically, but it does change it. And every small action, every time you do the thing you said you'd do, even in a tiny form, rebuilds something. That self-trust that quietly eroded, it comes back slowly, brick by brick. And the dream doesn't have to die for this to happen. You don't have to shrink it. You don't have to make peace with something smaller. You don't have to become a person who gave up on the big thing and learned to be content. But the dream has to come down from the wall. It cannot stay a beautiful, untouchable, perfectly preserved vision in your head. It has to become a project. Messy, imperfect, uncertain, humbling, difficult. It has to meet reality. And reality is going to change it. Reality is going to make it harder than the vision promised, and stranger and slower, and occasionally in ways you didn't predict better. The version of it that gets built will not look exactly like the version you imagined. Nothing ever does, but it will exist. And something that exists even imperfectly, even partially, even still in progress, is worth infinitely more than a perfect vision that never left your head. There's one more thing. The time, because I know what some of you are thinking, that it's been too long, that the window has passed, that the version of you who could have done this was younger, had fewer responsibilities, had more energy, had more time. And I'm not going to tell you that it's never too late, because that is not always true, and you deserve honesty more than comfort. But I will tell you this. The time that has already passed is gone. You cannot get it back. That is real. But the time ahead of you is still yours. And the decision you make today about what to do with it will determine what you're looking back on 10 years from now. 10 years from now, you will either look back at this as the moment when something shifted, or you will look back and realize that 10 more years went by, and the dream is still on the wall, still vivid, still intact, still waiting. You are not broken. You are not lazy. You are not a fraud for having the vision without yet having the life. You are someone with a real picture of what's possible, who got caught in a very human trap. The trap of protecting the dream instead of building it. The difference between the people who make it and the people who always meant to is rarely talent. It's rarely timing. It's almost never resources. It's the willingness to let the dream get a little dirty, to let it out of your head and into the world, where it becomes imperfect and real and actually genuinely yours. The vision is still there. It hasn't gone anywhere, but it's been waiting long enough. And so honestly, have you